Welcome to the Crafting Character Podcast. Steve Carter here, and in association with my good friends at Preaching Today and Food for the Hungry, I bring you a podcast that will hopefully help you get better at the craft of teaching and preaching and communicating while always ensuring that your character leads the way. Today, I'm really excited because we are going to have an interview with Jason Thacker, and he released a book recently called The Digital Public Square. And really, it's a conversation on Christian ethics and technology. And I don't know about you, but I find myself constantly wondering when it comes to plagiarism, when it comes to all the AI stuff, when it comes to the actual tool, and that's even like chapter 1 of his book, the tool of technology. How do we use this? How do we understand it? And so I'm excited to pick the brain of the one, the only Jason Thacker. Jason, thank you for joining us on the Crafting Character Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Steve.
Yeah, I'm curious. First off, talk a little bit how you got into Christian ethics.
Yeah. It's kind of an interesting story. It's not something I ever planned on. I recently was appointed assistant professor of philosophy and ethics here at Boyce College in Louisville, Kentucky, and continue to serve on as a research fellow with the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. So there's a lot of Christian ethics very quickly. Again, it wasn't something I planned per se, but it's kind of it's always a God story about the way that he kind of brings us and where he ends up putting us. But I was raised kind of in a more technologically rich home. More so than most people, because my dad actually worked for a Fortune 500 tech company. And so we grew up surrounded and kind of inundated. I remember I was writing my book on AI and I asked my dad, I said, when did we get the internet? And I was expecting like 95, 96, maybe even 94 or something like that. And he said, no, I think, we had an access to kind of a rudimentary version of it because of his work in the late 80s, actually, which was much earlier than most people. And so it's something that I kind of grew up surrounded with. But I didn't become a believer until I was 18 years old. I kind of grew up in and out of the church. I had a quasi, maybe, I wouldn't say understanding. I knew some of the truths of the gospel, but they didn't mean anything to me. It really wasn't about me. It was just kind of ascending to certain truths. So I didn't really become a believer until I was 18 when I really understood the nature of sin and things. Went into thinking I was going to go into ministry, into church planting and pastoring. The Lord had something very different in mind. Fast forward a few years, ended up coming here to Louisville to Southern Seminary to work on a degree in Master of Divinity, got really plugged in my local church. And from there, just had this growing interest of loving technology and loving kind of how it works and how it functions and everything like that. I'm not a technologist. I'm not a coder, a developer per se, but I always like to think about technology. And that started to kind of intersect with this idea of ethics, of what do we do in light of what God has already done and who he is. It's that idea of our actions, our behavior, kind of relating to the nature of ethics. And so that's really kind of how these two worlds came together for me, of talking about the nature and study of ethics, the love of God and love of neighbor, as well as what do we do and how do we live that out in a very technologically rich society.
Okay, so just right there, you kind of gave potentially two different definitions for ethics. I'm curious, how would you define ethics in your mindset?
I think most people, when they hear of ethics, they think of like a business ethics class they had to take or an intro to ethics they had to take, which often comes down to these kind of moral dilemmas. We have two options. Which one do we do? This one or this one? And what do we do about it? And that's part of ethics. I don't want to say it's not that, because that does happen. We do have moral dilemmas. We do have these conundrums. We don't know how to proceed. And we have those kind of really difficult choices. But ethics, I think, properly defined, especially biblically defined, is how do we live in light of who God is and what he's done. So the idea of, in terms of God's revelation of himself, is the nature of theology. We see God speaking to us through scripture, revealing himself, revealing the nature of the world. What does it mean to be human? All of these theological truths. And then what do we do in response? So we focus on our actions. We focus on our decisions. With that being said, then ethics is really everyday life. Yeah. Really, ethics is discipleship. It's worship. It's how we live our lives in light of who God is and what he has done. It's what do we do? It's kind of focused on our response. And so I really like that. That comes from a figure named Carl F.H. Henry, who once wrote about how love of another is the sum of the Christian ethic. It's this outward focus. We see that in Matthew 22 of loving God and loving our neighbors ourselves. The focus of love for someone else, whether God or for others, is the nature of ethics. What do we do in light of who God is and what he's done?
I love that. And I think it's such a great launching point, because even as you said that just a second ago, I was like, man, that's now you just get to overlay these topics,
Yeah.
technology, and then okay, in lieu of what God has done, what do we do? Like, and it just kind of, I always think if I have a healthy framework, it helps make my life work, and so I
Yeah.
love those kinds of helpful definitions. Let's just dive in and talk about from technology that it seems like. And again, it might be different from your household growing up who had access to the internet, in the late 80s. I'm curious, like, do you find that technology is moving faster in taking new ground than ever before? Or does it just seem like it's faster because, man, there's just so much more than around us, but really in the late 90s, it was moving faster. That just not everyone had access to it on the smartphone. Talk about your kind of summary of technology today.
Yeah, I think I kind of say both and in some sense. Is in many ways, when we think about the fast-paced nature of technology, the exponential rise in technology, we are indeed facing some very, maybe even unique challenges, unique opportunities before us. We do live in a very fast-paced environment that seems to only be getting faster. Everything's about efficiency and speed and convenience. And that's one of the kind of temptations in a digital age, is that everything keeps moving faster, faster, faster. But we know that from the scriptures, especially, the idea of wisdom and discernment is actually a very slow process. So we may tease that out later about the idea of biblical wisdom and cultivating those virtues and those habits, those righteous and holy habits, versus the kind of fast pace, almost frenetic pace of technology today. So in some sense, there's some unique challenges. The flip side of it, though, is that I think often when we think about technology, whether it's AI or social media or what have you, we think about all these advancements in technology. And we want to say, well, we're facing new and kind of novel challenges that humanity's, asking questions humanity's never asked. And I think that's true in some ways. But in many ways, if you dig down deeper to the questions that are being asked today about how do we think about ChatGPT, and how do we think about preaching, and how do we think about teaching, and how do we think about, robotics and all these advancements, at the core of them, when you start to really drill down and focus on them, you'll notice that it's really us asking the same age-old kind of fundamental questions that we've always asked as a society, that we've always dealt with. This is one of those things that a lot of listeners may not have loved their philosophy classes. One of the reasons I love teaching philosophy is to remind my students the questions you're asking today, many of which have been asked throughout the ages, and people have sought to answer them in different ways. And so understanding philosophy, which is really the study of wisdom, that's what philosophy means, is the study in the way of wisdom, is cultivating these virtues and these habits and the character needed to face these really unique challenges before us. So those kind of fundamental questions are the same age-old questions. They're just being asked in light of new opportunities. So we're having questions about ChatGPT and how do we think about that? And I think a lot of that actually comes down to what do we think it means to be human? That question has actually been asked since the very beginning of time, and by hundreds of thousands of people ever since. And so by studying and thinking about the nature of ethics and the nature of philosophy, we can seek to answer and to navigate some of those challenges from what I believe hopefully is a uniquely biblical way, a uniquely biblical concept of philosophy and ethics, and a unique kind of Christian vision for those things as we navigate some really interesting opportunities, as well as some really unprecedented challenges.
Yeah, I actually really love that. I appreciate that so much, because sometimes I think we can get like so worked up about, ChatGPT, like, oh my goodness, what are we gonna do? What do we do? And I like how you frame that, just in the sense of, oh, this is about a deeper question, and a question that's been asked, for many, many years. I'm curious, just with what you were just saying, is for you having like a biblical study of wisdom that you can overlay. Talk about that in regards to AI. Because I think in some ways you are right. We are chasing efficiency and speed, and in some ways there's beauty in that, but in some ways we are cutting those corners that actually really get in the way of, like you said, cultivating true wisdom and I think embodying what the kingdom is all about. Talk about that for a second.
Well, the way of wisdom and that idea of discernment is really key to discipleship. It's really key to how God calls us to live and what we do in light of, again, what he's already done. So the nature of ethics, the idea of wisdom and discernment is absolutely key to that. We see this in the book of Proverbs. We see this throughout the wisdom literature. We see this in the book of James, which I always joke. Sometimes you read James and you're like, he may be talking about Twitter. I'm not positive, but James 1:19, to be slow to speak, slow to anger, and quick to listen, seems to be this virtue that not only is always needed, but maybe especially needed today in our kind of social media kind of rich age. But that this is some of these concepts I unpack in my book, Following Jesus in the Digital Age. It's a really short, kind of small book for the everyday believer to kind of pick up and to understand what technology is, and then how is it forming and shaping us. And that idea of forming and shaping us or discipling us may hit people the wrong way when they think about technology, because we're raised, and this isn't just in the church, this is actually kind of wider society as well, is to see technology as just merely a tool. It's almost like a neutral tool. It's not really good. It's not really bad. It's essentially a tool that we use. We use these technologies. It's really about the way you use it. That's what it is. It's because it's just this neutral tool. Well, I think social media has kind of awakened us to realize that maybe that's not exactly true. There are some truths to that. We do focus on that idea of agency and accountability and responsibility, that you are ultimately accountable to God for how you utilize these tools. But the tools aren't really neutral, are they? Because you think about that as you wake up in the morning, and often the first thing we grab is our phone. And we instinctively, often without even thinking, open up 100 different apps, and we're checking our emails and notifications, what we missed over the night. What's the last thing you look at before you go to bed? Often your phone. You're checking to make sure you didn't miss anything before you go to bed. We forget that people are sleeping like us. So we typically wake up in the morning, maybe outside of a few email newsletters and social media updates, you're really nothing of consequence maybe. And we'll just be honest, a lot of times what we do see is breaking news or notifications really still aren't of consequence even throughout our day. It's not something we really need to know. Maybe we want to know, maybe we want to, quote, be informed. But are we being more formed by these things? Not just informed and having more knowledge, but are they actually shaping and forming us, where I think many of us kind of live in many ways with almost a low level anxiety. We feel like we're constantly missing something. What's going on? What am I missing? Well, I should probably check my phone. Or, that idea of, I think my phone just buzzed. Let me pull it out real quick. And then there's nothing there. Yeah. This idea of like phantom legs or phantom vibration syndrome, where we feel like it's happening, or we just instinctively like, I've got a second to kill. Let me pull up my phone real quick and see what I'm missing. Yeah. What's happening there? And I go back to that idea of what Paul talks about in Romans 12, 1 and 2. He says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind through the power of the Holy Spirit. He's assuming you are being conformed. He's not saying if you're conformed. He's saying do not be conformed. You are being conformed. You are being shaped. You are being discipled by someone and something. Yeah. The question is, especially for Christians, is who's doing that discipleship, and then to what end, what purpose, what goal in mind? Social media has a very particular goal and purpose. It has a very particular type of person it's seeking to craft in some sense. These tools are not neutral. They're also not good, nor they're bad. I think that a proper, and kind of what you referenced in terms of this digital public square volume, that first chapter is helping us to develop a proper understanding of what technology is. Yeah. So if we understand what something is, then we can start to think about it and to navigate and to cultivate that sense of wisdom and discernment to navigate the challenges. Because if we merely focus on the symptoms instead of the root kind of core, we'll constantly be kind of mediating or mitigating these symptoms rather than getting actually to the core problem and reshaping our worldview or the way that in which we see the world and understand the world around us. And so that's what I attempt to do, not only in the Following Jesus book, but also in this digital public square volume, is to help us cultivate a proper understanding of technology in order to navigate a lot of the challenges before us.
Yeah, and I think that's so helpful, because I think I can look at sometimes technology and be like, oh yeah, it's a little bit like Spider-Man theology. With great power comes great responsibility, yeah. And you can just look at it. It's either how you use it for good or how you use it for bad. Like, But I think what you so beautifully do is you begin to recognize like, oh, this isn't neutral.
Yeah.
This is like, we have to be understanding like what is shaping and forming us,
Yeah.
and that can be technology. That can be that we're being more discipled by an anchor person on a news network than we are Jesus. That can be like, there's so many different places that this can be overlaid into.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's really, really helpful. I'm curious for you, like, where do you see technology as a profound opportunity for good in the local church and in specifically the sphere of preaching? And where are you, man, if you could get into every pulpit and teach to really help the congregations be shaped and formed, to know about the dangers or the complexities that is coming with technology, what would you want to share? So the opportunities, and what kind of warnings would you want to give?
I think listeners are probably most familiar with a lot of the opportunities. We see a lot of opportunities to reach people, especially these kind of missiological benefits of technology. It's something that the Christian church has long embraced, actually. If you look throughout history, the churches, especially in the 20th century, has really adopted technologies, been thoughtful about them, and used them to proclaim the gospel, to minister, to disciple, to teach. You think of the idea of whether it's radio or TV or internet or social media, something that happened during the pandemic that I thought was really interesting, especially right at the very beginning. You saw pastors taking to videos on their phones and going to social media to encourage and love their people. You see the way that technology has helped to connect us in some ways, to help us to even stay connected, to be able to do a podcast like this, or in unprecedented times of not being able to physically gather with one another. There was still some sense of community, but there was also something lacking there. And that's, I think, something really interesting to kind of play out is we're not just this sense of Christianity is not just about information transfer, but it's really about transformation, this embodied transformation. We need one another. We need to be in the physical presence of one another. Why? Because God didn't create us as kind of ethereal souls and beings that will go float. I remember growing up thinking that when I die, one day I'll go float up to the clouds and play my harps and kind of spin around and float around the rest of my life. That's not really the vision that we see in the scriptures about what this next life is to come. No, we worship a risen, resurrected Savior who also is going to resurrect us. There will be a second coming. Christ is coming back to return from the dead, will be resurrected like he is, to serve with him in an embodied existence for all eternity. That embodied soul, kind of the idea we speak about, what does it mean to be human? There are a lot of opportunities in terms of those missiological benefits, but some of the challenges that we're facing, I think, are really unique because we do live, as we've already talked about, in a very kind of speed-friendly, kind of efficient, convenient, everything's better, faster, stronger type of thing, that we can often fail to develop those discerning tools of wisdom, tools of understanding not only what does it mean to be human, but also the nature of how do we respond and how do we see the world around us? Is the world around us simply something that we can craft and kind of shape to our own meaning, our own truth, our own reality? Or is something actually kind of a fixed kind of order, a fixed reality that we're to align ourselves with? You see this in the way that technology shapes us. It forms us. I write in Following Jesus in the Digital Age that technology shapes and forms us in three distinct ways. One being the very nature of truth and understanding of truth. We see this from conspiracy theories to this idea of kind of our expression, what we feel like inside as individuals, this idea that we craft and create our own truths. Technology has allowed us some of those opportunities. Some of them, that's an immense challenge that we have to face. The very nature of truth. We see this in terms of responsibility, of who's at fault, who's at blame when X, Y, and Z happens. Well, it's those people over there. It's this us versus them kind of polarization, or someone really needs to fix this social media problem. Well, so we need government to fix it, or we need the industry to fix it because, I don't really bear any responsibility for the way I use these tools. No, it's actually all of us that bear responsibility for that. So reframing truth, reframing responsibility, and then also our identity. It's really, really interesting in a time of kind of self-made identity, self-made worth, self-made value, that we often define ourselves by the things we do rather than who we are. And so a proper Christian understanding of what does it mean to be human is that you're an image bearer of the Almighty God. Your worth, your value, your dignity isn't tied to what you do in terms of your actions, your output, your productivity. It's actually based on who you are, this unchanging status as the image of God. It's not based on how smart you are, how fast you are, how efficient you are, how gregarious or kind of relational you are, even in terms of the things you do in terms of function. It's based on this status, this unalterable status of the image of God. So you can see right there, there's a lot of opportunities with technology, but there's also a significant amount of challenges and big questions that need to be asked. And I think that's really where the role of wisdom and discernment comes into play, is to slow down enough in this fast-paced, frenetic environment to ask some of those big questions and to seek what I hope is a more biblical understanding of who God is, how he's made us as image bearers, and how he calls us to live in the world around us.
I love that. I love just the sense of the truth and the responsibility, identity. That's so helpful. I'm curious because you mentioned discernment a couple times, and what's amazing is the algorithm. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, we've farmed out our discernment to algorithms that we think you'll like this. We'll think you'll like this video. And and then I think sometimes it's like, one click farther in a certain direction. And I think all of a sudden you can just, I like this video and I like this video and I like this video. And it's okay if it's about dogs, but if it's about like bad ideology or like you mentioned, conspiracy theories or certain different pieces, you can get yourself kind of in a bit of a wormhole that could go and go and go. How do you train a congregation to actually have healthy discernment in a world of algorithms and people predicting what they think you're going to like? Yeah. And really to your Romans 12 path, I'm not going to conform to what somebody else thinks I'm going to appreciate. How do you help congregants? Because I can just keep thinking from pastors who are going to be preaching this to go, how do you help them be aware of that? Yeah.
Well, in the Following Jesus in a Digital Age book, I have an appendix written specifically for pastors and leaders. So if you're a pastor or ministry leader listening to this, I encourage you to pick up that book. One, it's helpful for your people, hopefully, Lord willing, but also that last kind of appendix, I think, can be helpful for those in ministry and those who are tasked with the preaching and teaching of God's word. A lot of it sounds really trite. It sounds really, really simple. And most people kind of laugh at me initially when I say this, but this idea of being able to slow down, not only personally, but also corporately. We live in this fast-paced, frenetic environment where we're always on, we're always connected. We seemingly can't put down our phones. I mean, reality is you probably are listening to this on your phone, if not on the internet, but I can tell you without a doubt that your phone is probably within about a foot of you right now. Mine it's sitting on the desk next to me. Steve, I probably agree with you. It's probably right next to you. You may be listening to this. You may be mindlessly scrolling social media while you listen to this podcast. We are always connected. We're always on. We can never slow down and disconnect. One of the things that pastors and ministry leaders can model, not only for our own health, but also for those that we are tasked with leading, is cultivating that sense of slowing down and disconnecting. It's almost as if that idea of a Sabbath or rest that we see throughout the scriptures is actually good for us. It's actually something God designed for us, that we are to slow down. We are to disconnect. Maybe it's a day a week. Maybe it's a couple hours a day. Maybe it's a day or two a month. Maybe it's a week a year or something like that, where we actually slow down and disconnect. And I think that can help us. That can almost provide some of the fertile ground to slow down and to think about these things, because we are being formed and shaped. We are being discipled, whether it's the algorithms in terms of the things you might like. It's really, really interesting how we often kind of farm out our responsibility, or we think about the way that these tools are shaping and forming us. They're not neutral. There's a purpose. There's the design, not only in terms of the tools themselves, but also the things they're encouraging you to do. Why do they want you to continually stay engaged? Why does YouTube always have and coming up next and the 5-second timer in the next video? Why does it do that? Why? It's trying to keep your attention.
Yeah.
It's trying to keep you engaged. And one of the things we've seen, whether it was the Facebook files from years ago or even newer studies coming out with social media, is the way to keep you engaged is to continue amping up kind of the outrage, to continue amping up, kind of putting you down these rabbit holes, continually keep your eyeballs. You have to be constantly entertained. When remember Neil Postman's book from years ago called Amusing Ourselves to Death? That is very much true, not only in terms of cable news of what he was writing with, but even today of this idea, I have to keep your attention. So what do we do on social media? Well, let's put photos, let's put videos, let's put outrageous things, let's put clickbait headline and over the top kind of grandiose claims and big ideas. One, because people aren't reading it. What are they going to do? They're going to slow down. They're going to look at it. Maybe they'll share. And what does that attention do? That your attention is providing income because of the ad-based kind of surveillance capitalism, attention kind of a market that we live in. Your attention makes more money. It sells different things. It changes you. It gets you to do certain things. So again, we can see these technologies aren't neutral. They're actually shaping and forming us, not in the terms of our habits, not only in terms of the things we do, but also in the money we spend and what do we buy online. Now, I have to say, though, a lot of the personalization that we see today is actually really helpful. I get to see things that I actually care about or might actually care about or be exposed to things that I could find interesting rather than just a whole bunch of kind of generic junk. But we also have to realize that with that, and I don't want to keep quoting Spider-Man here as you did earlier, but that with there is an immense amount of responsibility to utilize these tools. So I'm often asked like, hey, what's a good age to kind of introduce technology or to introduce cell phones or social media teenagers or young people? And say, that's going to depend on the person. Yeah. I know some 15-year-olds that are probably more mature than a 48-year-old on social media. Yeah. I actually kind of wish they would use social media maybe more than their parents or grandparents because of the ways that they cultivate wisdom and discernment, but they have their own blind spots. We're each on a journey. We're each on a path. And I think that idea of cultivating wisdom and discernment says, look, it's not 5 ways to right your relationship with technology, as if we can have these kind of overgeneralizations to fix everything and move on to something more important, but actually that cultivating wisdom and slowing down and realizing what's going on, asking the right questions. I think we can do that from the pulpit. I think that we can do that in the teaching ministry and small groups, et cetera. We can also do it, and maybe most importantly, in our own families, to slow down, ask those big questions, and to proceed not with this kind of unbridled optimism or kind of this uncritical embrace of new technologies, but also not with this kind of deep-seated pessimism or just complete rejection. Is actually cultivating kind of a middle way and understanding what I think is a more biblical way of not just kind of outright adoption or outright rejection, is to be cultivating that sense of wisdom and discernment to say, God has given us the ability to make these things. It can be helpful for us. These things can help promote Christian discipleship. They can promote missions, but they also have some downsides. And so that cultivating wisdom and discernment is really key.
That's so good. I think one of the biggest growth areas for the church today is around the concept of discernment. Yeah. I think if many of pastors and myself included, like if I could be strong in those 2 words, wisdom and discernment, and just think about the choices, the disciplines, the habits, the fruit that would actually come out of my life. I always love talking to very, very smart academic people who love the church and have a heart for the church. But because you can give them a word and they'll define it, like ethics, and you defined it so beautifully. For you, how do you define discernment? When you talk about wisdom and discernment, talk about that definition. And then I really would love just to take that definition and move us into Chat GPT.
Yeah. Well, I think often when we think of ethics typically as a set of rules. We see the Bible as a set of rules. It's, basic instructions before leaving earth. I always remember being taught as a kid, Bible, in terms of what is the Bible in some sense. Well, it's interesting to note because a lot of people will come in and criticize a more biblical approach to ethics or something like that, or this kind of characterization of ethics as saying, well, what do you do when you hit challenges that the Bible doesn't have an answer to, like AI? The Bible doesn't say really anything about AI. Now, some people might want to read that into the book of Revelation or talk about the mark of the beast and that kind of stuff. But when you really look at the text and you're faithfully looking at it, what do you do? How do we proceed when we have these seemingly new or kind of novel challenges or questions that we're asking that the Bible doesn't seem to have a direct rule or law to answer and to navigate? That's one of the reasons that I tend to advocate to say the Christian ethic isn't just a set of rules. It is part of that. There are certain rules. There are certain commands, but it's those commands, those rules are almost like guardrails. Mm-hmm. And what they do is they keep us on the path of who we're becoming. We've talked about earlier about what does it mean to be human? Is it meant to be an image bearer? That we are one who are given this status, this unique status of who we are. But that idea of image bearer is not just in terms of our dignity, value, and worth, but also our destiny. This is to use an illustration from an ethicist, John Kilner. He says he has a book called Dignity and Destiny and kind of focuses on that idea of the status, but also who you're becoming. Because when we talk about image bearing in the scriptures, it's really clear that Christ is the image of God. We're created according to the image of God. He is our purpose. He is our destiny. He is the one in whom we're to become more like. A lot of people used to mock the "what would Jesus do" type of bracelets. I remember I had lots of them growing up, even though I wasn't a Christian, as we talked about earlier. But I thought that was, and it's interesting. Yes, that can become very legalistic, but it also can cultivate this sense of what would Jesus do? Yeah. He is our marker. He is our true north. He is he's our destiny. He's who we are to become as new creations in Christ. Where the old man is dead, the new one has come, this new creation. We're to become like Christ. So that idea of cultivating wisdom, that idea of cultivating virtue, in the sense of it's not just about the set of rules, but also about who we're becoming. Because what happens when someone is virtuous, when someone is wise, when someone is full of discernment, they face a unique challenge and they almost instinctively know what to do. Mm-hmm. They seem to be formed and shaped over time, and they respond maybe most accurately, most properly in a given situation that seems very new and novel. And so that's one of the things when we talk about wisdom and discernment, it's about becoming a certain type of person. It's because that cultivating that wisdom, that discernment, that slowing down, that thoughtfulness, that character that we see as, Proverbs talk about the glory of gray hair. I'm starting to go gray in my beard and a little bit in my hair here. Some listeners may see that if they have access to the video, but I'm kind of looking forward to it. It's interesting, though, in a society that prizes youth and kind of vitality and that being young in some sense, that's not really where wisdom and discernment is found. It's found over the long plodding, the long term, years after years after years, where you see someone and you say, they're just a certain type of person. Well, what type of person? They're typically full of wisdom and discernment and virtue. That they've kind of been through the ringer. They've been tried and tested. They've been refined, as we see throughout the scripture, that idea of being refined by fire. And that's one of the ways that we talk about wisdom and discernment. And I think that actually helps us when we navigate a lot of the unique challenges before us, whether it be AI or social media or any host of biomedical technologies, et cetera, is that we've cultivated these virtues, this humility, this sense of wisdom and discernment that can then help us to navigate the really big challenges by taking what we do and aligning that with who God is, how he's revealed himself to us, and what he calls us to do in these very unique challenges ahead of us.
Gosh, that's so good. That is just one of the most accessible ways. Just even thinking through the dignity to destiny and how discernment is just being able to see the kind of person I'm becoming and the choices that are coming at me. What's your honest take on AI? Yeah. Like with, to get to a point to slow down, to become the glory of the gray haired, refined by the fire. Like talk about that from a practical, how you make sense of it in the public square and are choosing a better destiny.
It's interesting in terms of the conversation surrounding AI, because until about 9 or 10 months ago with the release of ChatGPT from OpenAI, most of us, when we heard of AI, thought of one of two things. Either we thought of like sci-fi movie plots and the robots to come to take over, Or we thought, I don't use AI. I'm not ever involved in this. I'm really maybe fearful of it. Maybe I just kind of have an apathy towards it. Or maybe even kind of the other side, there was this optimism looking forward to kind of where we're heading and what we're going to be able to do in the future. But it always felt like it was at arm's length and not really something we need to focus on. And then, OpenAI releases a public kind of preview, a public offering of ChatGPT. We had ChatGPT 3 and kind of moving on to different iterations, this idea of generative AI. Reality is that for years, you've been utilizing artificial intelligence, whether you realize it or not. This isn't a new issue. I was writing back in 2019, where the organization that I've served with for a number of years, the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, released the first ever faith-based statement of principles on artificial intelligence back in 2019. My first book, The Age of AI, comes out in 2020. This was entering into a conversation that was already being had, but maybe not at kind of the popular level in some sense. ChatGPT kind of ushered in this popularizing of AI technologies, a lot of questions and intrigue surrounding it, but also it's one of the things that's interesting. We're almost in an AI hype cycle where everything is AI and nothing is AI all at the same time, or we have these existential crises and what are we going to do, and thinking about, this is going to revolutionize and change everything. We're almost in a hype cycle where almost every single podcast, every single article, wall-to-wall media coverage about, hey, AI is changing everything. And actually, as one who's been studying and thinking about these things for a long time, I'm like, yes, it is changing everything. We actually need to cultivate that sense of wisdom and discernment, but not a lot of the panic that we see today about it. Is to cultivate that idea of it's not just a tool, but it is forming and shaping us. And AI, I think, causes us to ask some really unique challenges. It challenges us, especially with generative AI, to say, what does it mean to be human? Because for the longest time, we all kind of thought this idea of creativity, reason, rationality, that's what made us human. But when you see a tool that's mimicking or imitating certain human capacities and functions, or even outperforming humanity in very particular ways, it's a little disconcerting. It's a little overwhelming. It can cause a little fear and angst in us because we say, well, I thought that's what it meant to be human. So what does it mean to be human? Or is there actually anything unique or valuable about humanity? Which is one of the things I call kind of the irony of the age of AI. Because with AI, it's very interesting. Not only are we seeking, we say, well, when are these computers going to gain consciousness, and who's going to be responsible? When we talk about rights, and we'll talk about all this, we give them names and faces. I won't even say her name because one of these assistants will wake up. But you see with whether it's Siri, Alexa, all of them, we're giving them names. We call them she, her, him, it. It's really interesting. And then we seek to humanize. We have robots and we humanize, we give them faces, and we do all this. And we have all these questions about, well, what does it really mean? Or when are they going to wake up? All that. So we're humanizing in many ways our machines. The flip side of it is that we're dehumanizing ourselves. And that's one of the ironies that I see that's really rich here, is we're humanizing our machines. And at the same time, we're saying you are nothing special. You are nothing really unique. We live in to use a very philosophical term that I'll define here, is we live in a very materialistic universe. That idea that all you are, everything that you know, everything that you see can be reduced down to just pure matter. It's just physical interactions. There's nothing unique, nothing special. I think for many of us, that makes sense in some ways, because even the Bible speaks of this idea that from the dust of the earth you came, to the dust you will return. Yes, there is this physical nature of things, but that's not simply what it means to be human. There are things about our world. There are things, even in God himself, that's supernatural, that's outside of the natural, that's transcendent, that's outside of this world. And so that idea that we live in a simply materialistic universe where everything kind of reduces down to matter really fails to do justice to ideas of justice and truth and the good and emotions and love and all of these type of things that don't really fit neatly into that kind of materialistic box. AI is causing us to ask some of those really, really fundamental questions about what does it mean to be human, Because if we have a faulty understanding of what it means to be human, we also have a faulty approach to these technologies and how to navigate them. So that's one of the reasons I call that sense, if we're going to cultivate wisdom and discernment, is to go back in some sense to the basics of who God is, how he's made us in as his very image, as image bearers. What does that actually mean to be human as we seek to navigate a lot of these challenges? Because yes, these tools are quite amazing, honestly. I was just last week kind of toiling around with Dolly from OpenAI with the image creator and was saying, I want you to do X, Y, and Z. And, it gets over time, it kind of gets to, and I got this really neat little oil painting that I thought was really cool of something that I've never seen before that I was describing, and the system was creating. It's generating that. It's creating that, if you want to use that language. We see this with text. We see this even with video and audio even. We've seen a lot of questions, and you kind of mentioned earlier about plagiarism and the pulpit and different things. And we can go down that route if you want to as well. But there's so much kind of going all around with AI right now. I think it would be helpful for the church to slow down, to ask some of these fundamental questions, and to kind of orient ourselves to what's really going on. Yes, these technologies are powerful. Yes, these tools are very innovative and creative and lots of exciting things, but there's also some very unique challenges. And that's one of the sense of whether it was the 2019 statement, my book in 2020, or kind of my further works as well, is my hope is to equip the church to be navigating the challenges and opportunities ahead of us with that wisdom and discernment rooted in a biblical understanding, a biblical worldview, to realize that the Bible is more than sufficient to navigate the challenges before us if we'll slow down and ask the right questions.
Man, that's so good. I think that line of we are humanizing AI and dehumanizing ourselves, like in so many ways. Like I even just think about that. Yeah, you give it names, Alexa. We do that on the regular, and man, that's something I'm going to have to journal about. That's so rich. Talk about plagiarism, because I think, some of my friends who are pastors are like, hey, what's so great about, ChatGPT is in many ways I can just throw in, hey, give me all the insights you can, or sermon on James, chapter 2, mm-hmm. and things are popping up, and, they're getting a bunch of notes and ideas, and it's, for some of them, they're using it as the jumping off point, and it's making them more efficient in their study time. I've seen that there are some people who have full on created messages that are basically a carbon copy of what came out of ChatGPT. And so I think that there's a sense of, man, in that wisdom and discernment, how do we use this in sermon prep or in research that you're finding, whether in the college front, of how to do this well in a way that is, I think, true and with integrity. And, it's easy for me to say, hey, this quote came from Dallas Willard. Are we going to start to see something be like, this quote came from ChatGPT, up on a PowerPoint slide? Like, what does healthy integrity for the pastors look like when it comes to something like this?
I think first and foremost, kind of the overriding principle is not seeking to deceive others.
Yes.
I think one of the things that happens in these conversations, I'll just use this, whether it's in my classroom, I teach my students this from the very beginning. We have an open and honest dialogue about these tools, the prevalence of these tools. And say, look, you may be tempted to utilize these tools. You're overworked, especially those who are pastoral ministry, are overworked, overtaxed, or burnout, are full of anxiety, have 1,000 different things going on. And you can understandably see the temptation to utilize these machines to pass off someone else's or something else's in terms of AI. I think that's a very helpful distinction, the someone versus something. Ooh. That this is something versus someone. That's a conversation we can have another time. But all that being said, is to pass someone in terms of plagiarism or something in terms of something's ideas off as our own is intentionally deceptive and completely ungodly. I mean, it's the antithesis of the kind of honest, transparent, and open and integrity-filled life that we're to live. So I think we can say that full stop. Using it to deceive others or to pass off something else's work as your own is inherently deceitful and sinful, and should be just completely anathema to Christians to be able to use. But I also have to say it's also a tool. It's something that can help us, maybe even kind of jumping off point, doing research, providing an outline or writing some text or something like that. I've seen churches utilize it for writing copy for an upcoming event or something like that. You have a church receptionist who's overwhelmed and he decides that he needs to use something to write a whole bunch of questions or to write a whole bunch of things. Yes, we can utilize it for those type of things. And I don't think there's anything inherently wrong other than seeking to deceive, to say, no, this is my work when it's really not. But I think we have to slow down and ask some of those fundamental questions again. I know I try to cultivate that sense of humility in terms of my students and integrity and virtue. But I think it's helpful for all of us to say, what's really going on here? First, what is the act of preaching and teaching? What's the goal? What's the purpose? What is it? And what is God? What are the expectations that my people have? I mean, you think of Acts 6 and 7, where you see kind of the institution of the deacons within the church. The apostles are saying, look, it's not right for us to give up the preaching, the act of teaching and preaching, as well as the service of prayer to serve. So we're going to raise up servants to be able to do these things. You see that kind of, no, we have to prioritize coming to God on behalf of the people in terms of word and in prayer. And those kind of two gifts specifically of ministers and pastors and ministry leaders to say, this is how we're called to serve. And so slowing down to be able to ask some of those questions. What is preaching and teaching? Is it just information transfer? Yeah. If it is, man, AI is great for that. ChatGPT is great for that. Maybe. It's interesting to note how wrong it is sometimes. Someone with a trained eye goes, I don't know about that. Or you think of the thousands of commentaries you may be able to access on a specific verse, the meaning of that. Well, it's interesting to note when you ask ChatGPT, you're not getting the sources. You're not getting the citations. You don't know where that information comes from. Can you trust it? Yep. Most of the time, even as a professor, not all the time, sometimes I kind of pull the wool over my eyes and I don't pick up on it, but I can say, I don't know about that. Or where did you get that? Or, I know where that came from. And you don't have a citation. How is that case? When you go to ChatGPT, though, and you ask, is using this system plagiarism? No, it's not plagiarism, because we're not pulling from it's not just taking a whole bunch of information, regurgitating it, repackaging it, putting it forth. It is in some sense creating new ideas, in some sense kind of pulling from various sources, but you don't know where those sources are. You don't know if you can trust them. You don't know if they're actually right. There is a level of interpretation there that I think. And so when we think about the idea of the act of preaching and teaching, is to remember that it's not just about information transfer. It's not just this sense of communicating information per se, but it's actually about that transformation. Yeah. So one of the things that I've noticed about ChatGPT, and I'll say as full disclosure here and transparency, I was preaching a few months ago at a church. I'd already written my sermon, but I wanted to see what ChatGPT would say. And so I asked it to give me a sermon on this topic from this text. And the first one it gave out, and I was like, that's not terrible. That's not a bad outline. I could use that. I don't like it. It's not exactly how I would preach or teach this text. The second time I did it, because you can rerun the same query over and over, I ran it the second time and it was utter garbage. It was just bad. Wow. And it was not the same result, which I think is really interesting. So I'll say all that to say is that cultivating that sense of wisdom and discernment is not only realizing what these technologies are, their inherent limitations and downfalls, also to realize what the act of teaching and preaching is, which is actually that transformation, not just information transfer. To say, like, when I was taught preaching really early on, it isn't just going from the Bible to the people. It's not just teaching them what the Bible says. It's actually reading and letting the word of God work on your own heart, and then speaking and teaching out of that experience as a co-laborer in Christ. Yeah. That's something that I don't believe a system like AI can do, because again, it's not someone, it's actually something. It's a machine. And so it lacks something inherently of what it means to be human and what we're called to do in the act of preaching and teaching, of communicating God's word, and to being kind of on this fellow journey together as we seek to become more like Christ in every way.
Jason, this is fantastic. I mean, I think too, and I again, I'm gonna have to journal about this. And sometimes, like, I'll do these interviews and I don't necessarily know, because I don't send out questions beforehand. I'm like, I think, and then I walk away and I'm like, oh my goodness, that's fascinating. like the story you told about the church receptionist who might be overworked and so uses ChatGPT for copy. And you start to think about that with the conversation on wisdom and discernment and slowing down and what it means to be human.
Yeah.
You ask these questions of not, oh, how do I become more efficient? But like, why am I so overworked? And is there an empowerment opportunity for Acts 6 and 7 to raise up some people? Or is this moving us away from the someones that we can raise up to a something? And that seeking to deceive. I think there's something really, really important and powerful about that because, that is a full stop. How many books have you written? Because I realized like I knew of two of them, the Digital Public Square and then the Following Jesus book. You mentioned another one. Are there other ones that you've written?
Yeah, the Lord has given me the opportunity to write a handful over the years, but I also want to say one thing before we talk about that, kind of on that idea is the center kind of the Christian ethic, as we mentioned really early on, is the sense of love. Love for another is, to quote Carl F. H. Henry, is the sum of Christian ethics. That idea of loving God and loving our neighbor as ourselves. This is Jesus' own words in Matthew 22, to love the Lord our God with our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. Inherent in the Christian ethic is this sense of dignity, this sense of human dignity, human exclusivity, of how God has made us in his very image. And so any type of utilization of technology, but even specifically with artificial intelligence, we need to make sure that we keep human dignity at the very center and at the very core of all of the decisions we make, from the very seemingly inconsequential ones in the local church all the way up to the halls of government and Congress and to the worldwide kind of leadership as we think and navigate the challenges before us. Keeping that sense of human dignity and what does it mean to be human at the center of everything we do means at times we're going to sacrifice profits in order to prioritize people. Wow. Sometimes we're going to sacrifice speed and convenience because we care about the marginalized and the vulnerable. Sometimes we're going to sacrifice maybe the goods and kind of advantages before us because we care and serve people. We're to love God and to love our neighbors ourselves, first and foremost, full stop with no equivocation. Love God and love our neighbors ourselves. That does mean sometimes that profits can be good and technologies and conveniences can be good and efficiency can be good. But the center, the goal isn't just more profit or something to go faster, better, stronger. It's actually to ultimately love God and to love our neighbors ourselves. That kind of paradigm of loving God and loving our neighbors ourselves really started with my first book, The Age of AI, Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Humanity, that came out from Zondervan in 2020. Then I had the opportunity to write Following Jesus in the Digital Age, that small book from B&H that came out last August. The kind of larger volume, kind of more academic volume in terms of the Digital Public Square, that kind of focus on Christian ethics, religious freedom, content moderation, free speech, some of those type of editing. That volume had a little booklet come out for teenagers called A Student's Guide to Social Media, which taking a lot of these kind of big ideas and bringing them down to a level for a teenager to understand and to process and apply in their own life. And a couple other projects that I have in the works in terms of ethics, as well as privacy and some other big issues that I'm starting to think through. So some future book projects, some current book projects that I'm working on, and some ones that I've been able to do in the past. But the Lord's been really kind and gracious through all of this.
Oh, Jason, you are, God has just gifted you with such an ability to communicate such unique topics in such accessible ways and helpful ways to see them with a more biblical perspective and really give handles to go, gosh, like, is that actually humanizing the right or dehumanizing the wrong, And so man, thank you for that. Where can people find you?
Yeah, the easiest way is to go to my website, jasonthacker.com. It has a list of all the books and resources. I have a blog there, as well as an ongoing podcast called The Digital Public Square, which we tackle a lot of these kind of big issues in terms of life and ministry, and how do we think about those in increasingly kind of digital age in terms of the public square. So you can go to jasonthacker.com and find all of those resources and more.
Well, Jason, thank you so much for your wisdom. What a gift you've been. And please go grab those books, especially, I mean, for many of us in preaching, or I just even think for a bunch of you in that student ministry, like I have a 15-year-old and I want to go get that small booklet you had written for teens and social media. Because I think trying to find the right biblical language and ethics to help shape and form our kids, to see this in the proper view, I think is so critical, especially in today's reality. But my friends, thanks for tuning into the Craft and Character podcast. I'm so, again, grateful for the work of Preaching Today and Food for the Hungry that make this podcast available and accessible to the many pastors. And man, I'm just praying that the words that you heard today, that you would be filled with that wisdom and discernment to really walk in a true biblical ethic as you teach, as you live, as you pastor. Much love, everyone. Grace and peace.